Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Brawn Body Podcast. Joining me again today is Brendan Todd. We had him on the Monday episode and he was talking about his journey through powerlifting, some of the injuries he overcame, and just his personal fuel to keep moving forward. Again, Brendan is a NASM certified personal trainer. He has a bachelor's degree in exercise science and he really specializes in powerlifting. And as I mentioned on Monday, he is one strong dude. His best total from a powerlifting meet came in December of 2020 when he totaled 1,769.2 pounds. His bench press, which was 440.9, is literally more than my repetition max squat. So that just kind of gives you an idea of how strong this guy is. For more on Brendan, you can find him on Instagram at Tank Strength. And again, I highly recommend you check his page out because he's got all kinds of good information and useful tips that you can use on that. So with that, Brendan, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me back.
So when we talk about powerlifting, most people think big three. They think bench press, they think squat, they think deadlift. And ironically enough, these have changed over time. Like there's a time when barbell curls were considered a powerlifting exercise. So when we're thinking about powerlifting, it is a challenging sport. As we talked on Monday, there's a lot of demands that it puts on your body. And, it's not just lifting heavy weight, it's keeping your body weight in line to compete at a certain weight class. It's keeping your joints healthy. It's keeping your ability to move, through the full range of motion good. So with that, let's talk about your training a little bit. How do you balance all these different things, all these different demands of the sport and do so well at it all?
My training's actually definitely developed over time. Right now, I'm actually being coached by someone, Josh Bryant, at Jailhouse Strong. You can find him on Instagram and his books and everything. So right now, I'm only lifting 4 times a week. Each day is kind of specific to that lift, and I have like one accessory day. But before that, I was doing like 5 times a week. I got up to like 6 times a week. The idea is really just to know how you're feeling that day and how you're feeling that day and not going too ego on the lift. And also refining your technique. I know in the beginning my technique was trash, and not that I'm like a huge technique guy, but if you execute the lift every time the same way, your body's just going to be able to go through that groove better, So
Right.
yes.
So it's almost kind of like a case of less is more. I know most people are pushing 6 days a week in the gym, 7 days a week in the gym. There's people doing twice a day every day in the gym. And here you are seeing results on 4 days a week.
Yeah.
And
It's
go ahead.
It's really it's kind of less is more. It's also just, there's some people like my girlfriend now, she's squatting 4 times a week. I only squat 1 time a week. I mean, she's also much lighter than me. She's on a different program. It's really personal, and it's managing that total amount of stress that lift is giving you, right? When I lift, do like my bench day, I do a ton of pressing work. So it's not, that whole day is just towards pressing. So I do it once a week. But if I wanted to do it 4 times a week, maybe I would just only be able to do 1 exercise per week. It's finding your amount of stress that's going to give you the adaptation that you need to get stronger.
Right. Kind of finding that through self-experimentation, finding your own minimal effective dose, what you need to do in order to keep moving forward and getting stronger while maximizing the quality of the movement and not the quantity.
Yes.
Awesome. Good stuff. So with that too, just the sport of powerlifting in general, there's a lot of crazy strict rules that, you have to follow if you're competing. There's a lot of equipment considerations, that sort of thing. So how do you kind of go about balancing all of those, and what are some of those for those who don't know?
It depends on the federation. I compete USAPL, which is a drug tested federation. Like for instance, the bench, you have to have your head on the bench, obviously your butt and your back, and your feet have to be flat on the ground. But then you go to like USPA, and I believe you can have your head off the bench and you can be on your toes while you bench. Then you have, I'm sure there's a ton more rules. I don't know. All I know is I got to show up under, at my weight that I'm supposed to be. I'm not supposed to be, the deadlift is not supposed to go up and down. The squat, I'm not supposed to pause it, and I'm not supposed to fail anything. So, there's more people who like care more about the rules and about the look of the federation stuff. I'm still pretty new to this federation and to powerlifting in general. I've only been really just powerlifting for about a year, 2 years, a year and a half, 2 years. So, yeah, there's some rules. It's a little strict, but right now I just follow what I'm supposed to do and just execute it through.
Yep, that's nothing wrong with that. I know like the bench press pause is a big thing too. Obviously,
Oh
none of
yeah,
them
yeah.
want the bar bouncing off your chest, and that always drives me nuts at the gym because guys will be they're usually high schoolers, but they'll load up 225 on the bar because there's something about benching two 45-pound plates on each side. And they're bouncing the bar off the chest, their whole back, their butt is off the bench. It is awful for them. And I'm always like, can we even count that as a rep? Or
yeah, it's tough when you start lifting especially to like a powerlifting standards, and then you just look at everybody else, you're like, soft knees on that deadlift, that wasn't long enough pause. And I mean, yeah, you're always going to get the idiots in the gym who's trying to do too much and it looks like atrocious. But if you're squatting to parallel, if you pick up the weight off the floor and look like you got locked out, even if you don't pause on the bench, I'm like, all right, but you're just not going to be able, it's not going to necessarily transfer over to competition. So.
Right.
Yeah.
So kind of with that too, diving into the bench a little bit more. When we talk about the bench press, there's a lot more than just getting on a bench and pressing that goes into this exercise. There's a lot of accessory work you have to do. You have to keep each side even. A lot of people don't understand that the back musculature is super important for a strong bench, a leg drive, the list goes on and on. So when you're training for bench press or you're training clients for bench press, what are some of those accessory movements that you really like to focus in on?
Well, the biggest thing is, I mean, obviously I love the bench, just because the more specific you are in doing something, the better you're going to get at it. So a lot of bench volume comes from benching. And then it depends on the cycle, depends on what they're doing. I'll do a lot of dead bench press. I got that from my coach, Josh Bryant. You're basically starting at the bottom, starting from a dead stop, like a deadlift, and you're just pressing up, really working your power out of the whole. You're basically removing that elastic energy kind of you get from the eccentric portion of the lift. Then you got volume work with a dumbbell, maybe your feet are up on the bench. Then I dips, got a lot of dips, and then tricep work too. And and then tempos. Recently, I read a book by Cal Dietz, Triphasic, and he was talking about. Now, this is towards athletes, not necessarily like athletes, not strength athletes, but he implements eccentric and isometric tempos, and I took that away from that too. I just started throwing those in, and I've gotten pretty good results from that too.
Right. And the other thing I've noticed too is you do a lot of band work and even reverse band work sometimes. So what is kind of the rationale behind all of that?
Your band work is gonna usually it's like lighter at the bottom. So where you're the weak, some people tend to be very weak at the bottom, like right off the pause of the chest, and then it's gonna be increased attention at the top. Now the either normal band or reverse band is gonna do the same thing. It's just throwing the band in a different way. And a little different, I guess, feel to it. I forgot the word, but also has, accommodate. Yeah, that's what it's called, accommodating resistance. Yep. The nice thing about the bands, one, they're cheap. And And two is on the down portion, the band is actually pulling the bar down faster than, I guess gravity would, right? It's like, kind of like it's slingshotting down. So you also get that negative portion, that a different feel. So it's really snapping the bar down. Obviously it doesn't look like that. You're still controlling it, but and then more resistance at the top when
Right.
you're stronger at the top.
And I love this approach for multiple reasons. One, like you just alluded to, you're getting that over under speed training with the variable tempos and the bands, because, in one, you could be doing a slow eccentric, and in the next set, you can add the bands, and then it's pulling it down. So you're lowering the bar faster than you would on your own, in your own power. This is something for those listening. I know, I love Ross Egley and the stuff that he does. Obviously, there might be some performance enhancing going on there to do what he does, but he is very big on the over under speed and the altered tempo. And I love what you're doing with the bands as well. Dr. John Jaquish, I think is his name. He's a big biomedical guy. He actually only lifts with bands, and he is very much larger than I am and much stronger than I am. But that power of the accommodating resistance, strengthening the stronger portions while protecting the weaker portions of the lift, can do a lot for your joint health, and that can do a lot for performance long term. I really like those accessory lifts that you picked out there too, the dumbbell benching, the dips especially. I'm a huge fan of the weighted dips, and that's not something you see a lot of people doing anymore. Is a lot of people go over to the hammer strength machines, or the cable column, and bust out their cable flies, that sort of thing. So it's kind of interesting how we've seen a shift away from what I'll call the more classic exercises like dumbbell bench press, variations of the bench, and the dip, over to these like machine and more specific movements.
And there's a time and place for those too, but something like the dip, your bench, maybe even weighted push-up. I do a ton of those too. It just puts a ton of load on you, and while inducing, your stabilizer muscle, your muscles stabilizing the joints and all that, like a machine doesn't, or like an isolation thing does. It's not really like a chest fly. It's not going to put you in a position, really training a heavy compound movement to overload those tissues to get stronger.
Right. And with that too, when you're lifting heavy, I'm sure you're probably using higher set counts and lower rep ranges for the most part. But I think Lauren, when she was on a couple weeks ago, actually mentioned that you kind of do a scaled system where you start with a higher rep total or rep goal and focus on the quality of the movement, and then slowly increase the weight and decrease the number of reps as you go.
Yeah. The more weight you're going to be able to, the more weight you're using, closer to your 1 rep max, the less reps you're going to be able to do with it. So usually we'll start, if I'm doing like a hypertrophy phase or something like that, where I'm not really focusing on your 1 rep max. I'm just kind of focusing on how much hypertrophy we can get out of it. So we're going to be using lighter weights, relatively lighter weights, and more reps, maybe less sets. But then as we go up, increase the amount of sets, so we still get, some volume in out under heavy weight, but we're not going to be able to do, 6+ reps with close to your 1 rep max.
Right. With that too, I forget what I was going to say. But no, that makes sense. It's kind of like a continuum.
Yeah.
I think there's charts you can find online that correlate, how many reps you can do at a certain weight to your percentage of your 1 rep max. So you can kind of go off of that. But there's other ways to do it too. I know we use reps in reserve for everything. I think you were talking about RPE scales too for repetitions.
Yeah, I guess the RPEs depends on how you use it, but it can be similar to your reps and reserves. Be like, how many reps do you think you got left? But if you're going really heavy, just singles, and you're kind of close to your 1 rep max, you might not be able to get another super clean rep, but it's like out of how tough it is, maybe it's like an 8. So I might not be able to get another rep, but I could definitely do this for a few more sets. and not slow down.
Right.
So I usually use like how tough it is, what's the RPE, and then I'm looking at how the lifter lifts the weight. If they're struggling, they're shaking, I'm like, all right, so we need to back down a little bit. I don't want it to look like that. But if they're just like the bar's flying off their chest every time, or they're just standing up like it's nothing, and they're like, oh, it's like an RPE 9. I was like, come on, bro. I was like, you look fine.
Right. Now, we just talked about what we consider the best, the bench. But the next one is arguably the worst, the squat. So with the squat, I know a big thing for people is the mobility in the form. It seems like, most modern society has, cost people the quality of movement in their squat, which is kind of ironic because, again, when we're young, babies should be able to do a full range of motion squat. They're very lax. They're kind of
Yeah.
Gumby-ish, so to speak. And as we get into this modern lifestyle of sitting down, 7, 8, 9 hours in school, go home, sit in front of the TV, play video games, whatever it is kids are doing these days, things tighten up, you lose those movement patterns, and you need to kind of re-strengthen them. So for the people that you train, especially who don't have that squat movement pattern down to begin with, where do you like to start with that?
I'm a personal trainer too, so usually people, everyone I've trained who like power lifts or like in someone athletic, if you're playing sports, you should be able to squat, I guess, to depth or at least a parallel. For in the general, like the general population, person, if they're having a hard time squatting, they know how to do it usually. It's so you tell them to squat, they're like, how do I do this? But then you tell them to sit down into a chair, and then they're doing it fine. So you just usually I start with like box squats, like, oh, let's just touch our box, butt to this, okay. Then you change their stance with and stuff. Their legs looking really wonky. They're like not able to get down because their knees are shooting so far ahead, but they're like trying to put their butt back. You're like, let's just widen our stance up. Oh, okay. Now you're okay here too. For mobility wise, I think that one of the best ways to get more mobile at doing something is doing it.
Yep.
So don't throw on a ton of weight, but sit down there, maybe grab a kettlebell or plate, do a counterbalance squat. So you can sit down there nice and comfortably, try to find that, range of motion, try to find that where you like your foot placement to be, what feels most comfortable to you, where you can sit there for a little bit and keep your back straight and be fine. Then you got, some, mobility exercises that, anyone could look up,
Right.
um,
So I
yeah,
really like the specificity that you're bringing with this because you're saying, look, if you want to get better at something, you have to do it. Like,
yeah,
you can lay on your back and stretch your hamstrings all day long, but that doesn't mean your squat is going to be instantly better. And I like how you're touching too on kind of like making it your own. Not everyone's squat is going to look the same because not everyone is built the same. Some people are
yeah,
taller, some people are shorter, some people have different length femurs, different things going on with their hips, their lumbo-pelvic complex, and the list goes on and on of different, variations. And you can't just expect everyone to do the exact same lift the exact same way over and over again. So with that too, there's a lot of variations for the squat and a lot of training that goes into the squat, front squat, back squat, hack squat, the list goes on and on. And some people tend to be better at some than others. What are kind of your favorite variations for training that movement pattern?
well, in powerlifting, if you're low bar squatting, you usually can lift more weight than like a high bar squat. So let's just say your low bar squat is what you're going to do in competition. That's what you really want to get better at. Now, obviously, if you're just low bar squatting all the time, you're going through that same movement pattern and your joints are getting stressed the same way, which is great. But if we're overdoing it, maybe you can, get injured. Plus, you want to throw in some variability. So now you got to look at exercises that are closest to your low bar squat, but are not low bar squat. So then you have a high bar squat, right? Your knees are going out a little farther. You're a little bit more upright. Same thing with the front bar squat. You're getting a little bit more, at least I feel more in my quads. You're getting a little bit more quad activation. You're loading the posterior chain a little less. Then you got other things like a hack squat, um, or like any machine squat, leg presses and things like that, where you can get a lot of volume work and you might not be stressing the same, your erector muscles in your back if your back is toast. Where you can get a lot of volume and you can build some good muscle in a squat pattern. So it's going to have some transfer over, but it's not going to be like doing your low bar squat. And then another thing is just a nice belt squat. Let's just say holding weight up on top is not an option. Right now, I'm training someone who had a surgery on their shoulder. They had a labrum tear. So obviously, I'm not going to put anything on their back. So we have them doing a belt squat, and we got a lot of reps, a lot of work into. Your stance could be the same. You could be changing it up too, but you're just not stressing your back. You're not stressing the structures up top as much.
Right. And I know you actually even built a homemade belt squat kind of device there for training at home too, because a lot of gyms don't have a pit shark. A lot of people can't afford to put one of them in their home gym, that sort of thing. So it's kind of cool that, with some crafty planning, you can actually build some of these things yourself.
Yeah, it's a little it's a little rough. I guess it was over quarantine, so I was like, how can I add some more variability in my training? There's some lifters who like a very little variability, like to do the same thing. They're just keeping to their big three, and that's pretty much it, which is fine. I am someone who likes variability. I like to switch things up and do different exercises on top of the big three. So I just one day I went to Home Depot or Lowe's and I got a whole bunch of equipment, threw together this belt squat thing, and yeah, I've gone up to like in the 500s over quarantine on it. So I'm like, it hasn't
Wow.
broken yet, so I'm happy about that.
Definitely.
Yeah. But yeah, and then I told my coach, I'm like, hey, look, I made this thing. Let's use it. Sure enough, he put it in my program and it was great. You get a lot of volume work on your legs, but nothing on your back. You're not stressing those stabilizer muscles all along your backside, trying to hold
Right.
that bar up.
And, I think ultimately kind of what you're alluding to here with that is, everyone's going to feel different when they squat. Some muscles are going to be working harder than others. And that's kind of your own way of pointing out where you need to focus more of your accessory training. So if you're really feeling it in your back and your core, maybe you need to do more core bracing and core stability work. If you're really feeling it, in your glutes, maybe you should add a hip thrust or glute bridge variation to your own training. So with that, kind of going into the deadlift now. So we did the best, the worst, and what I'll call the hardest. It's very easy to mess up the deadlift. And I think we've all seen people doing that, awful rounded back variation of the deadlift in the gym, and it's just cringeworthy. So when we look at the deadlift, there's a lot of different ways people set up for this. They go conventional, they go sumo, the list goes on and on. So as far as the setup for the deadlift goes, how can you kind of deconstruct that?
Currently I do a conventional stance. I was doing sumo for a little bit, but it was really bothering my adductors, like really bad. Like if I didn't make the pull, I was like, I was walking funny. I don't know. I was probably doing it wrong. My mobility was not there. Some people, they can do sumo just fine, and you're decreasing the range of motion. So usually you're getting more, a larger lift out. You see a lot of big lifters pull sumo. Not to say you can't pull heavy numbers with conventional. The setup, if I'm training someone who is like, I guess again, general population, I try my best not to have them round any part of their back, keep it neutral. And then you get some powerlifters, like my friend who actually got me into powerlifting, their upper back, not their lower back, their upper back is like very rounded. And you're like, oh, geez. But for the general population, I'm like, all right, let's just keep it straight back, because we're not trying to really lift the most amount of weight. We're not trying to break any records. We're just trying to get stronger. So now you can go pick shovel outside, pick your kids up just fine.
Right.
If you're powerlifting, there is a purpose for a rounded back. You get in your upper thoracic region. You just might feel a little stronger there. I don't lift with too much of a rounded back. Some people lift with a really rounded back. And your structures up there are a little bit more created to handle that. I mean, it's not like the best thing, but your lower back, you want that locked in and straight, but you get that through proper breathing and bracing and your belt and
Right.
building those structures up.
Right. And for those listening, the reason we avoid the flexion and that bent posture of the lower back is when you flex your lumbar spine, your lower back, you actually increase the pressure on the front of your intervertebral discs. And when you increase the pressure on the front, well, something has to give. So this is typically the mechanism of injury for the disc herniation that we all have heard multiple times about. Is most disc herniations occur in the posterolateral compartment of the lower back, so in the back portion and to the sides of this ligament that runs down your spinal column. So avoiding that, which again is the mechanism of injury for a disc herniation, which can be very debilitating, is very important. How you kind of touched on the sumo and conventional, and how most stronger, like the high competitive power lifters, do the sumo pull. And correct me if I'm wrong, but with the sumo, you're pulling a lot more from your glutes, and with the conventional, you're pulling a lot more from your back musculature, like your lats, so to speak.
Um, I mean, yes and no. It's kind of hard to say you're pulling more because it's just a different movement. Like your back musculature, your lats are really just locking in your back, right? And
Right.
your erectors are really just locking in your back. So they're holding a nice isometric hold. So your back's not flexing over. Now you're going to get that with conventional and sumo, but your sumo, just think of it, a lot of people can get into basically a very squatty position. So they're not very hinged over. They're a little bit more squatty. So they're using, I guess they're a little bit more quads. Your glute, your different, your medius and minimus glutes. I may be wrong, but a little bit more of that than, let's say, your maximus. Now your conventional, obviously, your glute is to, stand you up straight, right, and hip extension and same thing with your hamstrings. So you might feel more hamstrings when you're pulling conventional and you're a different area in your glute too. But I tend to think of it more as a sumo, more as a squat like pattern. And conventional it's more of a true hinge. I mean, not even conventional, some people get into a really squatty pattern with that, having their knees way over the bar. True hinge would probably be like an RDL or a stiff leg.
Right. And touching on the RDL and stiff leg there, those are two very common accessory exercises we see people doing for the deadlift and this kind of movement pattern. Are there any others that you tend to recommend to people or train with your clients?
The whole idea is like the deadlift itself, it's can be very taxing, especially conventional, right? You're hinging up a lot of weight. The whole idea with the RDL or a stiff leg deadlift is you're not going to be able to lift as much weight with those. So therefore, you're still getting an overload effect on your muscles, but maybe they're just not draining your CNS like pulling conventional is every day. Those are the two big ones because I have a lot of people, they might not have access to a hex bar or like special machines, and all they have is some barbells. So I mean, that's fine. That, and then I also train, like we said, the back acts as a huge stabilizer and a little bit of movement. So pendulé rows, bent over rows. I like to do chin ups, even though that's more of a vertical pull, not a horizontal pull. Dumbbell rows, just to build up the back, and that's also going to transfer over to your bench too, right? A big back is going to be able to stabilize your body on the bench on the bench while you bench. Then you got trap bars. I usually do that for people more in the gen pop or really having a hard time hinging over due to a lack of mobility, or usually it's due to a lack of mobility or comfort. A hex bar or trap bar. And then things just like you're working your hamstrings, either through like some hamstring curls if you're going real isolated, or like maybe glute ham raise or something like that, just to build up those tissues, to build up that strength.
Right. And with that too, as we've kind of alluded to throughout this, these exercises and powerlifting in general should not be something people shy away from, because ultimately you're getting stronger at movement patterns you do every single day. And that's something for everyone, not just a small, specialized subset of the population.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think general population, and they're huge compound movements. Like your deadlift, I've done deadlifts before. My lats gotten sore. I mean, they're not like moving the weight at all, but they're just holding that isometric really, really, really hard, taking the weight up. So, and like you said, you're going through that full range of motion. Your deadlift. Maybe you're not squatting down every time you shovel snow. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
You should be bracing, squeezing your breathing, bracing, and then you're hinging over sometimes to do that. Your life is not like a barbell. It's very different, but those barbell movements train you for life. You got your bench, which is just a press. You got an overhead press, which is a vertical press. You got a chin up, which is a vertical pull. Deadlift and bent over rows, horizontal pulls, and a squat, training your squat pattern, right? Yeah. You should be able to do that. And you see athletes and you see general population people doing this and transfer over to their sport or their everyday life. So those are why they're great exercises. And those are why we test them to see how strong we are, because they're just so useful.
Right.
Great indicator of strength.
Yeah, simply put. So I know we're kind of running out of time here. So two last things. Do you see a over dependency of people on these assistive devices, I'll call them, for training? The lifting belts, the wraps, the straps, so on and so on.
Yeah. It depends. Like if you're training for powerlifting and you're going to lift in competition, let's say you're doing equipped or like raw classic, I believe, which is they're using wraps, then your main work should be with the belt on, with the wraps on, like you want to powerlift. Now, I don't know anything about equipped, so I don't know if you can keep putting those really tight suits on. But yeah, so I throw on sleeves every time I squat that, and my knees, they've helped my knees. So, but I also like just squatting without a belt. I like to be able to breathe into my belly and brace. I like to be able to do whatever I have to do without all this assisted equipment on. So you're just changing up the variability, doing all that. If you're going to the gym every single day and you're throwing on a belt for everything, then you're not training, you're bracing without a belt on. So maybe you're fine while you're in a meet, but when you go to pick something out and you don't know how to brace without a belt and you slip a disc, then,
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think, with that, a lot of people kind of over depend on some of these things. There's one individual at the gym I go to who always has a weightlifting belt on. It doesn't matter what exercise he's doing. He's doing tricep pushdowns, he's doing cable flies, he's doing machine seated bicep curls, and he's got his belt on. So
it's probably not too tight, because if you're wearing I have a big old thick powerlifting belt, I don't want that on any longer than I need it on. So if you're just walking around with it, you're probably not even using the belt the way it's supposed to be used.
just for show.
Yeah.
Fashion statement.
Probably an older guy, right?
Yep. So, and last thing here. So, as we alluded to, these movements, these exercises are for everyone. For those who want to get into powerlifting specific type training more, where would be the best place for them to start? Should they look for like a 5-3-1 program? Should they reach out to someone and get a program built for them? Or where should their first starting point be?
Program wise, there's just a ton online. Like if you want a program, I think there's there's a website just of Google Sheets of free online programs. I read Principles of Strength Training by Mark Ripito, which I know some people are like a little iffy about him. You know, he just has a very easy, simple plan. You add 5 pounds, you keep everything the same. And when you're a novice, that's just a great way. You're going to be able to adapt so easy compared to someone who's not a novice, you know, because you're just like you're basically like learning movement. So you're adapting so quick. So you can add 5 pounds to the lift every week or whatnot. But I'd say the biggest thing is at least recording yourself and finding someone who's knowledgeable about the technique. So you might not be like, oh, look, I look fine, but maybe your knee's just going in just a tad bit. Maybe your foot is a little bit too pronated. And someone should be able to point that out to you, be like, hey, you know, really think about spreading your feet. We want your knee to go in line with your toes. So if they're coming in a little bit, that's, you know, we're coming in a little too much over here. Oh, your lower back is a tad bit rounded. Let's think about doing this. Oh, you're not reaching depth like you want to. Let's just think about crushing a walnut between your femur and your hip joint. So maybe you can get down a little lower. You know, keep that back straight. You know, hide the ribs and all that. Just someone who's knowledgeable and help you out there. The amount you lift is not necessarily an indicator of how smart you are in something, but it will help. So if someone looks really refined, you know, serious, and they look like they know what they're doing, they might know what they're doing.
Right. So in general, just start, you know, don't sit around waffling, waiting for the perfect program. Just start something.
No, oh, absolutely. You kidding me? Do not wait for the perfect program, because you're going to be waiting forever. My programs I implement keep changing because I'm still learning. I'm still, you know, somewhat new to coaching. So I'm like, oh, you know, I like this idea. I'm going to implement it and see how it works with my athlete. You know?
Right. Keep it simple, and
Oh,
you
yeah,
know,
keep it simple.
don't underestimate the value of getting help from a professional or a coach or someone who knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
So awesome. And with that, if you want more on Brendan, again, you can find him at Tank Strength on Instagram. I would highly recommend following him because, as he said, he is on a journey to the top. He's very hungry and he's not going to stop until he gets there. So if you want to be someone who is with him from the start, go follow him right now. So with that, Brendan, thanks again for your time and for joining with us and for teaching us a little bit more about powerlifting.
Thank you so much for having me on. I hope I'm on again soon.